I'm 35 now, and throughout my life, I've often heard familiar jokes about how men don't know where the clitoris is or how to bring a woman to orgasm. While I understand some of this is cultural humor, I've always found it a bit one-sided. Years ago, I had an interesting conversation with a longtime female friend. I asked her, out of curiosity, how much do you know about male anatomy? She admitted she didn't really know much at all. That stuck with me. It made me wonder why there is such a strong expectation for men to fully understand a woman's body and how to meet her needs. Yet there doesn't seem to be the same emphasis or curiosity in the other direction. I've always made an effort to listen and be attentive to my partner's needs in the bedroom, but sometimes even the women I've been with haven't fully figured out what works for them yet. That's a tough situation. How can I help someone reach something they haven't explored themselves? Every person is different. Some partners have been able to orgasm quickly and easily. Others needed time and might not even get there, and that's okay. I've come to understand it's a journey, not a formula. At the same time, I've also experienced moments where intimacy felt very one-sided, where I was expected to put in most of the effort while my partner was more passive. I can't help but wonder, if we're going to talk about understanding and meeting each other's needs, shouldn't that be a shared responsibility? I'm genuinely curious. Have other men experienced this imbalance in expectations? And for any women reading, what are your thoughts on this? How can we make these conversations more mutual and less about assigning blame? Story 1. I can't help but think of growing up with Cosmopolitan magazine, which had sexual health tips for women in every issue. Those tips were terrible, though. However, I do think that was an example of women seeking information. Story 2. It's an interesting point, but as a man, I've never had a problem with a woman figuring out how to pleasure me. Every woman I've been with has had some differences in preferences on how to reach orgasm. Story 3. I have been able to reach climax in 99.99% of my sexual interactions. I am not sure exactly what the rate is for women, but it is significantly lower. The focus on understanding women's bodies comes from this imbalance. It even has a name, the orgasm gap. Story 4. I have heard that some generations of women hardly experienced orgasms. Simple male orgasms are easy and visible. There is no simplicity when it comes to female anatomy. Everyone prefers different things. It is also much more effort to make a woman feel comfortable enough to orgasm, whereas men can usually have a shallow and unfulfilling orgasm, so the rate of success is much higher. Story 5. I also believe that for most of recorded history, women's needs were rarely considered or were often outright denied. With the sexual liberation and women's rights movements, we became more vocal about these issues. Story 6. I think a few general assumptions are causing this to occur. It is generally easier for men to reach orgasm. Throughout much of history, the male orgasm has been the focus. Women do not need to reach orgasm for procreation, only men do. Therefore, sex has often been about men reaching orgasm. At different times in history, there was a belief that the female orgasm did not even exist. The idea was that if a male ejaculated, the sex was done. There has been a rise in understanding female pleasure and the clitoris. We know a lot more about the clitoris today than we did just 20 years ago. The clitoris is much more than just the pleasure button on the outside. The clitoral organ wraps around the vagina internally as well. The G-spot is an internal location to massage the clitoris. Alternatively, it is easy to note when men reach orgasm because of semen. Sex has generally been about male pleasure. Only in very recent history has there been a focus on female pleasure in the bedroom. You can find pockets of this throughout history, but in the United States, female pleasure has been a focus since about the 1960s. Pornography and much of the media center on male pleasure and the male gaze. Pornography is a visual medium with a predominantly male audience. Pleasure is centered on men reaching orgasm and not on women enjoying themselves. The fake orgasms displayed in most pornography are a poor substitute for a proper orgasm experienced by a female partner. Culturally, in the United States, there is the idea that all men want and pursue sex all the time. Women are often viewed as varied and full people, while men are seen as constantly striving simply to reach orgasm and be with women. This mentality exists in media and has for a long time. If men are always ready, then the focus is naturally on ensuring that a female partner is ready as well. Find yourself a partner who focuses on mutual pleasure, and everyone wins. My wife and I have been together for 18 years, married for 15. Our sex life is great, and we both have excellent orgasms. Hers takes longer than mine, and she still gives a lot of time to pleasure beyond simply helping me reach orgasm. Story 7. Men report experiencing orgasm in the vast majority of sexual encounters, which is not the case for women. Story 8. Hey, we like foreplay too, especially the older I get. You cannot just look at me and expect it to happen like when I was 20. Story 9. You're absolutely right. Personally, I think every gendered issue or discussion needs equal focus on both sides. I believe part of the issue is that it is generally easier for men to become aroused or reach orgasm, so it may be seen as less essential to the process. Most women, and the men they have sex with, would benefit greatly from understanding both men and themselves better. It is easier to focus on your partner when you understand your own body and do not require as much special, focused attention to reach satisfaction because you know what stimulates you. Story 10. Historically, women were not believed to enjoy sex for the majority of human civilization. The idea that the clitoris is an erogenous zone is relatively new. Even in historical anatomical studies, women's biology was not studied or considered. Most research focused on male anatomy. Few scientists spent their time studying men. Story 11. In the game of sexual arousal and satisfaction, women have been presented with a bouncy ball they can play with however they like, and men have been presented with a Rubik's Cube. If you know why that is, then you probably have more figured out in life than I do. The reality is that men will have more trouble solving the Rubik's Cube and therefore likely need more help and direction. For men, probably the more difficult challenge is oral stimulation, and that is why there is more focus on learning that than other things. This does not mean, of course, that there are no exceptions on both sides. That is a reality as well. Story 12. I think that if you are comfortable having sex with someone, there should be a basic level of trust and respect to express what turns you on and provide guidance for mutual pleasure. That said, there is a push for women to receive pleasure because women did not have a voice for centuries. Story 13. I feel safe saying that the number of times men walked away from a sexual encounter unsatisfied is significantly less than the number of times women have. That ratio would be even more lopsided if you excluded men who had death grip syndrome or another self-inflicted issue. It is better for people to care about those they are in relationships with, but I do not think it is unreasonable for there to be more focus on men than women in this area. Story 14. Achieving ejaculation is straightforward for men. It is difficult to ignore the frenulum and the glands when they are at the forefront of the penis. Story 15. I think that with men the more common issue is ejaculating too soon, whereas with women the issue is not achieving orgasm at all. It is often thought, correctly or not, that if a man is not achieving orgasm, the problem is mental or physiological because the anatomical equipment is straightforward, no pun intended. When a woman is not achieving orgasm, it is because she has not discovered the right combination, as female genitals are often perceived as a mysterious combination of a helicopter cockpit and an interdimensional puzzle box. Of course, in both cases arousal is a combination of anatomical technique, mental and emotional comfort, and physiological response. Story 16. It is just not the media you consume. You are 35, so you grew up in a time when magazines like 17, Teen Vogue, and Cosmopolitan were popular. Those magazines consistently had articles about how women can please men. Story 17. It is most likely because men get off easier even if it is not enjoyable. Why spend time learning the right way if it is not necessary to achieve the end goal? Obviously, we should encourage women to learn just as men are encouraged, but at the end of the day, it will not really change much. Story 18. I think those jokes are based on the fact that sex education about female bodies has a history of being exceptionally bad. It is getting better, but the situation was absolutely unacceptable. It is true that education on male anatomy does not have a good track record either, but some people genuinely do not know incredibly basic information, such as what a clitoris is and how many openings there are down there. It is like if your girlfriend never heard of testicles and thought that urine comes from the perineum, Story 19. Men need to understand that women's anatomy is not just about sex. It is also about women's bodies in general. The amount of misinformation and confusion regarding menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth is astonishing. I am horrified by some of the comments made by sitting members of Congress. People who are so wildly ignorant should not be the ones making the laws. Story 20. Saw a funny comedy bit where the comedian asked what would happen if a man was having sex with a woman and then he pulled out a male sex toy to finish himself off. Story 21. Likely because there are many women whose interest in sex is indifferent. Story 22. I recommend you look up the orgasm gap. It is well known that women in relationships with men orgasm less frequently than women in relationships with women or men in relationships with women. I do not remember the numbers for men in relationships with men, but I believe it was somewhere in between the two. One leading hypothesis to explain the orgasm gap is that women are more focused on their partner's sexual pleasure than their own. For everyone's benefit, it would be best if men learned to focus more on their partner, and women on their own pleasure. Story 23. Because it is usually quite easy to satisfy a man and generally ranges from slightly challenging to nearly impossible to satisfy a woman. Story 24. It is not just about sex. It is about dating too. How often have you heard endless advice about how to date a woman, how to treat a woman, and how to be a good partner for your woman? You never hear the other side. Story 25. Because there is much stigma about men only focusing on their own pleasure instead of women's pleasure. Because men are considered one and done, while women can have multiple orgasms. I know that some men do not know what they are doing, but with the information available today, whether in pornography or books, physical or online, one can surely learn because her pleasure can be your pleasure. Story 26. I think it is driven by the fact that most women will not achieve orgasm from vaginal penetration alone. You typically need to understand more about female anatomy than just penis goes into vagina to help them reach climax. Story 27. I feel the answer is clear. It is much easier for men to reach orgasm than women. However, that should not discount the importance of focusing on and understanding what your partner likes and dislikes. It remains very important. Story 28. Because men as a whole are much easier to bring to orgasm. From an evolutionary standpoint, the male orgasm has become a necessity for reproduction. Because of this, the man being able to achieve orgasm easily is desirable. The female orgasm is not required for reproduction. While a woman who orgasms easily might be more likely to produce many offspring because she enjoys sex more, it is not the same evolutionary advantage that exists in men. Women who are incapable of orgasm through penetration still produce offspring. A man who cannot orgasm through regular intercourse will not produce offspring. Story 29. I have never had a man not finish or be satisfied. Unless he says something, and some have made requests for specific things which I will comply with if I want to, I am confident that I do not have an issue with pleasuring men. Women, however, typically do not finish in most heterosexual encounters. This is the focus because sex has been marketed as something men get to enjoy, and men often do not enter the experience thinking about a woman's pleasure. Story 30. What were the circumstances when your needs were not taken into account? One-night stands? Friends with benefits? Prolonged relationships? All of it? Did you communicate and explain your need for a deeper connection or active engagement? Or did you just take your empty used condom and walk away disappointed? Being selfish is not a gender trait. It is a personality trait. However, you try to generalize to the point of absurdity. In Western societies, starting from the lower middle class and above, there is a trend to vocalize women's need to orgasm and an expectation for a partner to satisfy this need. In other parts of the world or different social levels, not so much. Women are finally communicating their needs after centuries. If men could do the same, it would make the world a better place. I think it is not enough to teach how sensitive the vein underneath the penis is or how hard someone needs to suck, but also how to communicate one's expectations and desires clearly so the other party understands and does not feel offended. Story 31. Guys are much simpler, and honestly, a lot of the more complicated stuff for guys can be discussed in the bedroom or right before and after. It is quite easy to tell your partner if what they are doing is not working for you and what you want. I know my first sexual partner was horrible at oral at the beginning, but telling her what I liked and did not like made her very good very fast. If a woman is not putting in effort, it could be that she is lazy, or it could be that she literally does not even know to ask her what you want. Just communicate. If she is still putting in little to no effort, then just chalk it up as a bad sex partner and move on. Story 32. It may sound cliché, but the more I care about someone, the more I want to know what pleases them. I have only had one sexual partner in a long-term relationship, but I have researched many ways to improve intimacy. Now that I am dating, I am asking all kinds of questions and exploring online communities to become a better partner when the time comes. I am very open in person, so if we are being intimate, you will receive my full attention. I am not sure how this applies to everyday dating, except perhaps making sex with a stronger connection exciting again. I do not mind people having friends with benefits or one-night stands, but those options seem impossible for me to have or provide fulfilling intimacy. Story 33. It is amusing to hear all the women talk about how simple men's bodies are and that everything is in plain view. None of them have mentioned the prostate yet. It is obviously not in the open and difficult to find. It can open up a whole new level of pleasure if the man responds to pressure there. Story 34. A lot of this stems from the cultural idea that sex is something men impose upon women. In a relationship, if he is not getting what he wants, it is his responsibility. If she is not getting what she wants, it is also his responsibility. Many people influenced by egocentric popular feminism think this is good because they do not want the responsibility of managing their own sexual satisfaction. There are conveniences in this arrangement, even if there are fewer orgasms. Compounding this is that the basics of male sexuality are easier to understand and manage, simply from the shape of the male anatomy. Men generally express what they want. They try to make it their version of fun or sexy, which might come across as awkward or clumsy. They may say they want her to perform oral sex, ask how she feels about anal sex and threesomes, and offer new positions. Women often do not communicate their desires. They expect their partners to understand. Partners are expected to communicate and explore new things. This is a key reason why women often prefer men with substantial sexual experience. Such men bring experience to the relationship, filling gaps in sexual understanding. There is value in a man who has slept with many women. The collective experience gained. A man who knows what to do because he has done it often before. Therefore, there is a strong emphasis on teaching all men how to be better sexual partners because women should not be expected to teach their partners. Story 35. Men are taught how to treat women but not what to expect from them. Women are taught what to expect from a man but not how to treat him. There are many examples of this. Story 36. Because on average, men do not have a hard time reaching orgasm during intercourse, even if their partner is not doing much more than just lying there. Most women do not need to put in effort to be acceptable sexual partners. Meanwhile, many women struggle to orgasm even by themselves, let alone with a partner who is not fully engaged. If both parties are only half engaged, the likely outcome is that the man reaches orgasm, even if it was unsatisfactory sex, while the woman does not. Additionally, most sex is already male-centric. Penetrative intercourse is viewed as the main event during sex. Many people would not even consider non-penetrative sexual acts to be sex. Men usually derive much more enjoyment from penetrative intercourse than women do, and most women cannot reach orgasm this way. Women generally receive more pleasure from sexual acts that many people regard as simple foreplay and not very important. That is why there is a desire for men to focus more on these acts because the average heterosexual sexual encounter already revolves around the man's pleasure and orgasm. Story 37. Sitting in a decision encounter, I have nearly always completed, but nearly no woman has completed by my hand, though not for lack of trying. Those who did complete, it was easy. Tickle here, a rub there, done. The ones who couldn't, I would ask what they wanted me to do, and they often didn't have an answer. When asked if they ever masturbated, most said no, but those who said yes usually said they couldn't complete on their own either. My general rule was to recommend that they start masturbating more to figure out what they needed to get there. Once they could figure it out for themselves, they could let me know. Now that I am with my wife, we have been working on it for years. I have gotten her there a couple of times, and she has gotten herself there once or twice, but it is difficult and inconsistent. One contributing factor is that she is on medication that can interrupt some of that. In the end, we are generally taught that sex is supposed to be mutual. For men, completion and satisfaction are generally simple. For women, they are not. So we tend to focus on that because we are trying to be good partners. Story 38. You're right that it should be more fair, but the common excuse is that women's pleasure has been diminished or ignored for many decades, so extra focus is necessary to make up for lost time. However, in the last 20 to 30 years, children have become adults during a time when women's pleasure has been a focus and topic openly discussed in popular media and other consumed content. The imbalance is now just a relic of that particular period. Story 39. During my late teens and 20s, I had two female friends who, on two separate occasions independent of one another, asked me about the third ball and how we can sit comfortably if it is right in the middle. Story 40. Because men's needs can be satisfied through sex almost 100% of the time, many women do not reach orgasm from sex alone. To take care of them, you need to do some additional things to make them happy. Story 41. When studies are conducted on men and women having orgasms, men reach orgasm essentially 100% of the time. The same is not true for women. Therefore, efforts are being made to address a problem that affects women but not men. Story 42. I would say both genders are very much inclined to learn how to please each other. As men, we do not see information on how to please a man because that is not information we are seeking unless we are gay. Even if you read the headlines, How to Please a Man, you would not be interested in that subject unless you are just curious. Have you ever learned a new word and then suddenly heard it everywhere? I think it is kind of like that. Combine that with some of the most aggressive algorithms on the internet, and you will not even get a glimpse of what interests women, such as makeup tutorials. The media we consume, at least on the internet, is different for everybody. That is why, Story 43, most of men's anatomy is visible. Being able to easily identify and touch sensitive areas is most of the battle. Women's erogenous zones are hidden enough that many sexually active men do not know how to find them. The G-spot has presumably existed since prehistory, but the term was not coined until the 1980s. Even then, many gynecologists denied its existence. Story 44. The statistics on orgasm completion are important information you may be missing. Most women do not reach orgasm, whereas most men do during sex. Story 45. For what it's worth, I'm pretty easy to satisfy. Give me some natural intimacy and don't make me withdraw, and I'm very satisfied. It seems like most women in their 30s are comfortable with that. Women, on the other hand, often require a variety of tools and stimulation working together to reach climax. There is that imbalance, but considering I'm not connecting with new partners daily, I'll accept that trade-off. Story 46. I think in general it is because men are easier to please. That is, of course, a gross simplification, and I am sure men often, perhaps unconsciously, lean into that stereotype by not expecting or asking for more. Story 47. In my 20s, I was accused of being gay and a cheater because I wasn't immediately aroused when a girlfriend sat on my lap to watch television with me. I have had some rough blowjobs, like she was trying to chew a cigar, and I'm sure a lot of men won't prevent themselves and complain about it because even a terrible blowjob is better than none. I think that's where many of the starfish champions come from because no one is going to coach a woman since it is so easy to ruin the mood and become self-conscious about it. I used to call this girl my little cappuccino machine because she got me messy and frothy. I said it once, and she would always wipe me off immediately when I pulled out like it was a bad thing. Even compliments can be detrimental if you do not say them precisely how the other person wants to hear them. I think freely discussing plans should be normalized in any relationship. Story 48. Well, let us face it. Generally speaking, men are relatively easier to reach orgasm and usually do so. There does not seem to be the same need for extra attention or education. Story 49. Because men are not complicated, and very few of us have any difficulty having an orgasm except on rare occasions, which are usually due to too much alcohol, drugs, exhaustion, or temporarily because we just had sex with someone else. Story 50. Well, for most men, an orgasm is easy to reach. For a majority of women, it actually takes energy and effort. Anyone can make a man climax. Story 51. Men have to understand women for women to like them. Women will be liked even if they know nothing about men. In simplest terms, obviously. Story 52. Male equipment just isn't that complicated. Communication is important, obviously. Some men want their testicles stimulated. Some want control. But if you know where the frenulum is and you know not to use your teeth, you will be fine. Getting a woman to orgasm is a lot more complicated. Story 53. All discussions about sex are heavily influenced by the large number of men who experience sexual arousal and reach climax easily. You are correct that women often do not realize how much more can be done to help a man achieve climax or to increase his enjoyment of the experience, but they usually do not need to know, so it would not make for very good comedy. Story 54. Probably the same reason there are many more recipes for casserole than canned soup. Heat. Stirring occasionally. Pretty simple directions. Story 55. Welcome to the echo chamber of male sexual enthusiasts. We are the heroes society needs but does not deserve. I think consumer demand has driven the general opinion that men are responsible for educating themselves about women's bodies, but not the other way around. Most people are not sexual enthusiasts. Most men are not even sexual enthusiasts. But most sexual enthusiasts are men. Because most of the demand for sexual information comes from male sexual enthusiasts, most sexual information focuses on female anatomy. Most people are completely oblivious to this topic beyond common memes. Most sexual enthusiasts are men because men tend to be more interested in things, and women are more interested in people. Learning about the physical details of sexual organs is a matter of interest in things. Since male sexual enthusiasts make up the majority of consumers of sexual information, there is not nearly as much interest in male sexual anatomy outside of certain communities. Therefore, most guides are about how to please a woman, and general society perceives that as the main message. I am amazed at how many women I have met who are really into sex and good orgasms yet are not motivated to research methods or anatomy, especially male anatomy. They focus on the vibe and chemistry and approach it by feel and instinct. This baffles me because I enjoy understanding the things I enjoy. I like to drive, so I understand how cars work. I like music, so I know how speakers work. I like sex, so I know how female anatomy works. I understand that most people are not like this, not even most men. It is very apparent to me that most humans are not researchers. They go off vibes, take anecdotal advice, and stop there. They are not curious enough to get to the bottom of things. That is fine. They have strengths that I lack to balance it out. Ironically, women are aware of this vast repository of information available to men and resent that most men ignore it. Women do this without self-awareness because they are not educating themselves about men either. Honestly, I do not blame most of them because why would they when most men they meet are just as clueless? We male sexual enthusiasts are doing all the heavy lifting here. It is because of us that the knowledge is out there. Most people will ignore it, but a few might accidentally learn a new trick or two that brightens their day. You are very welcome to the ungrateful and uncurious majority of society. And before you say, I am not like that and you are wrong for generalizing, of course you are a counterexample. Almost everyone on certain online communities is already an outlier. I did not generalize. I used words like most and tend. Of course there are female sexual enthusiasts, and they are the angels among us. The sexual information ecosystem consists of about 5% of women who are sexual enthusiasts feeding tips to about 15% of men who are sexual enthusiasts. The rest of society can be left behind with mediocre results because they cannot be bothered to learn how. Story 56. Are you serious? I knew 10 ways to give a great oral sex by the time I was 10 because I read my sister's Cosmopolitan magazines. Story 57. I am a man and somewhat agree with women focusing more on finding what they like, but this almost has all lives matter energy, considering the disparity between men and women who climax during sex. Story 58. Probably because men are seen as lazy, selfish lovers and are supposedly incredibly easy to please. Source: literally any women's subreddit discussing mutual pleasure. There might be elements of truth, but the original poster has a good point. It is kind of bad to basically assume men are not worth investing effort in to see what they like in the bedroom. Yes, I am cranky today. I still stand by all of this. Story 59, because at a surface level, male pleasure is simple. It is easy for a man to climax during penetration, but not the other way around. It does not have to be a deep societal question. Story 60, because women are more naturally attentive to feelings. I have been with partners who prefer their testicles being fondled, some who do not want them touched at all, some who like deep oral stimulation, and some who want the frenulum toyed with. I do not approach sex assuming I know how my partner's body works. I listen and learn, just as anyone should, regardless of gender. Story 61, non-binary with a vagina here. In general, it is easier to help someone with a male body reach orgasm. You do not need to read lengthy guidelines to use a knife, but you would probably need to read the manual to use a kitchen robot. That being said, I also wish this topic were more of a two-way street. Just because a knife is intuitive to use does not mean there are not dozens of tips and tricks to learn and master. Sex is all about having fun, in my opinion. The more you know, the more fun you can have. On a personal note, I often feel like a sex worker in my own relationships. I am sex positive and like to learn new ways to help my partners reach orgasm. But the reverse is not true. All the men I have been with thought it was boring, too complicated, or not worth the effort to help me reach orgasm too. So, I understand when you say that you feel in charge of everything. Even if I do not have a penis, I am also always in charge of my partners and my own orgasms. Story 62, men who look around ours or any other society, except for the roughly 3 matriarchal cultures, and think they have it harder than women do not deserve to call themselves men. Those are boys. It's very simple. It's not hard to spot if you pay any attention to any woman ever. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule as with everything in life, but for the most part, these are objective truths, most of which you already pointed out, making your confusion even more baffling. 1. We joke that men don't know where the clitoris is because most men act like they don't know where the clitoris is. Most men climax most of the time because women make sure they do. Women do not because men do not make sure they do. Our society celebrates men's sexuality and shames women. Women are taught to be ashamed of their bodies from before puberty unless they are 6 feet tall and 105 pounds, average runway model, severely underweight, as I'm guessing you don't know that either. So it is harder for women to feel comfortable enough to climax. Story 63. Almost every woman I have ever met did not care about how I would like to receive oral sex. Admittedly, most of them also did not want to perform oral sex because it made them uncomfortable. So fair, I guess. Story 64. Because women historically have been told things like lie down and think of England. Until the last 100 years or so, women's pleasure was not even considered. It is making up for lost time. Story 65. Because it is just easier for a man to ejaculate. If a woman is bad at oral sex or stimulating the penis ineffectively, a man can just have intercourse and basically guarantee ejaculation. This is not the case for most women, who need specific attention to the clitoris to reach orgasm. Also, men tend to be grateful for just about anything. For a man to think it was bad, it has to be truly horrendous. Story 66. Primarily, there has been a lack of education on the topic until recent years. Another minor factor is that it has not been politically correct to say, but many women from the past couple of generations in the Western world were raised under third-wave feminism. Despite the positives it brought, one clear drawback was an inherent and usually unintentional devaluing of most, if not all, men and their needs and wants. Story 67. I think it is because women tend to require a bit more to be pleased than men. It is important to learn about partners' pleasures on both sides. Not everyone likes the same things. Story 68. It's because all women are wired differently. They don't always climax from penetration and sometimes dislike oral stimulation. Vibes, having fun, and going with the flow play a larger role for females in general. Whereas nearly any man on the planet, if stimulated by his genitals, will climax with nearly a 100% guarantee. I also didn't mention foreplay. This is another important aspect of arousing a woman. While you can take a man from completely relaxed to orgasm within minutes by stimulating his genitals orally. Story 69. My pleasure during sex comes from seeing the woman enjoying herself. Hearing and seeing a woman orgasm is, for me, the best part of sex. Story 70. Some women have a reactive sex drive and rely more on the man leading with his sex drive. Some women can build their confidence and develop their own sex drive. Story 71. I think a lot of women are in relationships where they never reach orgasm. In both of my long-term relationships, that has been the case, and the men finished very quickly. I know I could have done things to make it more pleasurable for my partner, but I feel women often have partners who cannot help them reach orgasm at all. Story 72. Because the man can usually easily ejaculate during intercourse, while women often require additional stimulation. That is my story, and I am going to stick with it. Story 73. Because the male orgasm has historically been considered the standard completion point, probably because a man usually cannot physically perform for a while after orgasm. Story 74. Traditionally, men pursue and women are pursued. Men have to put in the effort and women decide whether they are worthy. Male orgasm is relatively simple and easy to confirm. Female orgasm is less straightforward. Men are encouraged to have sex and are praised for it. Women are shamed for doing the same. Men orgasm in the vast majority of their sexual encounters. Women do not. Story 75. Because men can ejaculate more easily compared to women, this sometimes leads to a bit of arrogance in women thinking, he ejaculated? I'm good. I don't have to work on my skills. And a dose of envy. I want to ejaculate that easily too. Story 76. I think it's just the ease. Men are not exactly like Coke bottles that shake until they burst, but that is still a close reality. In my experience, it is about 99% friction that gets things done, whereas women need more, such as special attention in specific areas. Story 77. I do not think it is controversial to state that women are generally more complicated than men regarding sexual pleasure. It is not to say that men are not worth as much effort. It is just a different set of rules that applies. Story 78. Honestly, coming from a very active 57-year-old, men do not very much in physiology regarding zones. All women are different. Some like gentle, some slow, some inside, some both inside and outside. It takes a good 3 to 4 sessions to get a partner dialed in to achieve consistent results. So all this energy about men learning where it is misguided, as it is never in the same places, thus perpetuating men's sexual immaturity. Story 79. On the one hand, it makes sense. The orgasm gap is real, and emphasizing understanding women's anatomy and needs is part of addressing that. But on the other hand, it is likely an extension of the patriarchal idea that women are alien and inscrutable and require special knowledge to understand. Vulvas have largely the same parts as penises, just in a different configuration. Knowing the names is good for general knowledge, but not necessarily for sex. So I think some of it is society finding ways to invert what should be good and empowering for women, learning about their bodies, into something oppressive, implying their bodies are alien and unknowable. Story 80. The long and short of it is that men orgasms more easily than women. Men can usually finish eventually, whereas women may not reach orgasm unless extra care is taken. In my experience, this fact makes women tend to think they are good sexual partners by default and see less need to understand their partner. Fortunately, this issue can be resolved with practice and communication, assuming the partner cares about your pleasure. Story 81. Partly, it is because men generally reach orgasm more easily than women. Therefore, putting in extra effort to learn what a woman likes tends to be more important than the other way around, assuming that both partners want to give and receive pleasure. Partly, it is because men are more likely to be selfish, abusive, or careless sexual partners. Some of this behavior is simply due to poor character, but it is also related to anatomy. The penetrating partner can cause more harm to the receptive partner than vice versa. Additionally, women communicate about sexual experiences far more than men do. They share insights on both positive and negative experiences, advising one another on what to do and what to avoid. Women recognize they are more likely to have unsatisfactory experiences, so having a skilled partner becomes a more significant consideration for women. Of course, there are many exceptions, and the issue is often more complex. Some women may feel that simply showing up is enough and hope their partner performs well. Not all the communication and advice exchanged among women is healthy or helpful. Story 82. The answer is simple. The penis is more sensitive to stimuli than the vagina. Therefore, it takes more effort to make a woman feel good. Have you ever wondered how even gay men are able to have biological children? Well, there you go. Story 83. It's surprising to me that many people here are reporting faking it. I think two things are at work that many do not understand or do not practice. First, communication. You need to talk to your partner. If you cannot talk about sex with each other, you are probably not having good sex and are doing it wrong. Second, if your partner is not enthusiastic about pleasuring you, you are likely not doing anything to make them enthusiastic. Find out what they like. Attend to them intimately. Give them massages and show your effort. Story 84. Most women I know have gone above and beyond for their male partners. While it is uncertain to find a man who cares about their partner's pleasure, I have had boyfriends in my youth ask for anal sex before making any effort to ensure I reached orgasm. And those were kind men as well. It is hard to care about this when you have been treated that way. Many men prioritize their own orgasms before even making a woman reach orgasm. Story 85. I'm going to be honest here. It is extremely easy to help most men reach orgasm. Women need a detailed instruction manual, but it is often confusing and not always effective. Most women do not even know how to achieve orgasm themselves. That is why I am more attentive to the needs of any of my sexual partners. She has a harder time than I do reaching orgasm. Nature simply does not prioritize her orgasm as much as mine. Story 86. As a woman, I have been with over 30 men and never had an issue pleasuring them. I have also never met a man who was afraid to tell me what he likes. Out of those 30 or more, I have had maybe 5 men actually listen to my requests and needs, and maybe 2 or 3 have made me finish one of those unintentionally. My experience is not unique. Most of my female friends have had similar or the same experiences. Story 87. I have very much felt this in my sex life, especially in my 20s and 30s. The simple reason is that while male pleasure, particularly the heights of male pleasure, is not easy to achieve, male orgasm is trivial to achieve for most young men. The same is not true for female orgasm. Women are far more likely to reach the end of a sexual encounter without achieving orgasm at all. One of the great ironies, at least for some men, is that by focusing on their own pleasure, they could probably improve the experience for both themselves and their partners. When a woman is constantly asked if what is happening is what she likes, she is likely to get in her head and start to feel like she is performing for her partner. Likewise, the man is in his head about whether he is performing mechanically proficiently enough and whether he is lasting long enough, both of which likely interfere with those things. A man who is doing what feels good in his body is more likely to move in a way that is pleasurable to his partner. A man who is not thinking about whether he will last long enough is likely to last longer. There is an irony that when you touch someone's body for the pleasure you feel in your hand, it often also feels better to the recipient's body. I am sure there are men and women for whom none of this applies or who experience it differently, but I have had these conversations with many men and women recently in a sex-positive community I participate in. Story 88. This has me thinking about the "I'm in the pool" episode, where a woman sees George naked after he gets out of the pool and begins to laugh. George tells Jerry about the situation, and then they ask Elaine if women know about shrinkage. Elaine responds with, "It shrinks." Story 89. Society has spent more time preventing women from talking about sex than considering that not only should women be allowed to do so, but men should also be allowed to do the same. Instead, it has been noted how simple men are compared to women and their needs, and this has been used to further attempt to muffle discussion. A side effect of this is that people believe that men actually are simple. Story 90. I feel like a lot of this is resolved with communication, like most things in a relationship. When you both talk about what you like versus what you do not like, it makes a huge difference. I think a lot of people hold back the truth so as not to hurt their partner's feelings, but more open and honest communication actually goes a long way. Story 91. I guess it could come from the idea that men are selfish during sex and that sex is over once the man orgasms. Story 92. Love this question. I have another: why are most medical treatments, medications, and even car safety features tested on men but not on women? Story 93. Because it is assumed that men's sexuality is simple, and because men are considered easy, and because men are supposedly the active participant seeking sex while women are the passive participant hoping to be pleased, the focus in such a one-sided transaction is on optimizing that transaction by ensuring the passive participant is satisfied by the active participant. Naturally, this assumption is completely false. Yet, it still persists despite the fact that people should know better. Story 94. Don't worry about it. That's why we are building sexual robots now. They will not get headaches, and you will not either. Story 95. As a woman, I believe that women reach orgasm less frequently than men. Therefore, there is more emphasis on men making women reach orgasm. I personally prefer to make myself reach orgasm rather than leaving it up to a man. It is just easier. Sex with men is kind of overrated in my opinion. Story 96. Because the groupthink is that men do not need more than a semi-warm body to lie there and not resist. Women can be like a Rubik's Cube but not impossible. Men just need enthusiasm. It does not matter what the act is. If the woman acts excited to be doing it and is willing to do whatever he suggests, then he will usually be pretty happy. Story 97. Because men do not complain about it enough, and we refer to having sex as getting lucky, whether we think it is good or not. Story 98. Most women cannot climax just from penetrative sex. Most men have no problem doing so. It is not complicated, and honestly, if you do not know this at this stage, then it is concerning. Story 99. This is like asking why there is so much focus on Black Lives Matter. For hundreds of years, one of the two has been neglected. Story 100. Honestly, I am not interested in trying to get a man to finish even faster than he already does, especially when I barely ever get my own turn to finish. Story 101. Because in the Western world, sex is often viewed as something a man earns and a woman awards. Why should women learn to be better lovers? Men are the ones trying to woo them, not the other way around. Story 102. Because their equipment is more complicated, more training is required to operate it properly. Anyone can cause a man to climax. Arousing a woman often requires a refined technique based on observing what she responds to and what she does not. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.